So Emily, what's on your radar?
Well, back when Meta was just Facebook, some people referred to it as the Facebook or Facebook.com back in the day, Mark Zuckerberg talked a lot about a long-lost term he once called, quote, the social graph. Quote, people already have their friends, acquaintances, and business connections, he said back in 2007. So rather than building new connections, what we are doing is just mapping them out. This, quote, web of people's real-world relationships, as Wired defined it at the time, was different than most social networks, the outlet noted. Sites like MySpace practically encouraged users to create new identities and meet and link to people they barely knew, Wired added. But Zuckerberg didn't care about using the internet to make new friends. That's from Wired. Facebook's specific goal was to add virtual connections to already existing connections, not create new virtual bonds where none previously existed. That was probably naive, sure, but it was better than what Zuckerberg announced just this week. Quote, one of the main transformations in our business right now is that social feeds are going from being driven primarily by the people and accounts you follow to increasingly also being driven by AI recommending content that you'll find interesting from across Facebook or Instagram, even if you don't follow those creators, Zuckerberg said on an earnings call this week. Right now, he added, about 15% of content in a person's Facebook feed and a little more than that of their Instagram feed is recommended by our AI from people, groups, or accounts that you don't follow. We expect these numbers to more than double by the end of next year. Zuckerberg carefully added, quote, our strategy isn't about public versus social content and interaction. It's about enabling a flywheel that compounds both. So he's taking a company that was originally predicated on connecting us with people we knew and changing it into a company that intentionally, increasingly connects us with people we don't know. In his announcement this week on that earnings call, Zuckerberg clearly indicated that this was a response to market demand, explicitly invoking the success of Instagram's Reels, which of course are very similar to TikTok. So where's this market demand coming from? Facebook's user base is aging, we all know that, and teenagers seem less interested in virtual public socializing. As Zuckerberg noted, Meta likes Reels because people tend to direct message them to friends privately. That's the flywheel he was talking about. So why does this distinction matter? We're not meant to connect instantly with people on the other side of the world. This new reality is completely warping our person-to-person incentive system. To be fair, social networks are not without benefits. They have plenty of those. Crowdfunding saves lives. Viral posts can raise awareness of problems on an incredible scale. New media can bypass corrupt gatekeepers and bring accurate reporting to the public. That's what we do here. PTAs can organize easily. People meet their spouses and make friends. Cold cases get solved. But when we interact in geographically organized communities, the stakes for good and bad behavior are significantly higher, and there's a greater sense of accountability. If you call someone a slur in the local newspaper or even the local bar, you've just disgraced yourself in front of people in your community, people who know your boss or your parents or live in the same neighborhood or just drink at that same bar all the time. Alternatively, if you make a good point in the local newspaper or the local bar, you've just reflected well on yourself in front of people in your community. If you look good at a bar and not just in a face-tuned picture on an Instagram feed for your scattered friends from college to comment on, that's a stronger incentive, for instance, this is just one example, to take care of yourself, stay in shape. These incentives are natural and much healthier. They encourage us to do good and discourage us from doing bad based on the expected judgments of people around us. The detachment, anonymity, and global reach of social networks are kicking American communities when they're already down. When deindustrialization, pornography, divorce, recessions, opioids, everything is ravaging so many localities. We invest in physical reality more when we aren't under the illusion we can escape it. When San Franciscans are constantly incentivized to weigh in on snippets of what's happening in public schools in Kentucky and vice versa, we are only making the country worse. When adults with zero local ties can reach out to teens in other parts of the country on TikTok and quietly engage in inappropriate discussions with those children, the distance makes it harder to be disgraced in front of people whose opinions matter in your everyday life. The shame stings less when you don't have to feel it at a barbecue. So as Brett Weinstein once said, the greatest threat to humanity is unprecedented levels of evolutionary novelty. Zuckerberg basically wants to profit off of making that problem worse. I'm going to read another quote from Weinstein because I think it's worth considering in full. Here it is. Think about the fact that when President Kennedy was shot, every American who was old enough to understand what happened had a very personal relationship with his death, to the point where most were triggered into a state of very real and presumably psychologically measurable grief. Why would the death of a stranger cause these physical manifestations of grief? In some sense, this person had been a living, speaking guest in almost all of their living rooms. It felt very much, therefore, like they'd lost a family member. This was a level of evolutionary novelty that was already spectacular, long before we got to the era of deepfakes, anonymous Twitter accounts, and sock puppets operated by people who want to shift our collective conversational dynamics. We have layer upon layer of novelty, and today we are in an era of hyper-novelty. The rate of change of the novelty we face is so fast that it has outstripped our evolutionary capacity to keep up. That's all from Weinstein. Again, there's good and bad associated with most technologies. Humans have the capacity for good and evil, and our creations reflect that. Technology helps us overcome the limitations of nature in some very good ways, like, for instance, irrigation. There are benefits to the Facebook of 2007 and even the Facebook of 2022. But do they outweigh the disadvantages? The questions of censorship and election interference are important ones, but they're much easier for people like Zuckerberg to answer than more fundamental inquiries about the ethics of his technology itself. As we sit here, Zuckerberg is devoting his vast resources to developing the metaverse, which he claims, quote, enables deeper social experiences where you feel a realistic sense of presence with other people no matter where they are, whether you're playing games or working for hours at a time, or you're just jumping in for a minute at a time to say hi to a friend or collaborate on a project quickly. Given some of the product and business constraints we face now, said Zuckerberg on the same earnings call, I feel even more strongly now that developing these platforms will unlock hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions, over time. This is obviously a very expensive undertaking over the next several years, but as the metaverse becomes a more important part of how we live, from our social platforms and entertainment to work and education and commerce, I'm confident we're going to be glad we played an important role in building this. So there, he's telling investors the metaverse will be lucrative, and he's arguing it'll help us forge, quote, deeper connections. It will likely be lucrative, but it will only keep us numb, sedentary, and alienated from the people around us whose physical presences motivate us to live healthier lives. When he predicts the metaverse is going to become important in every part of how we live, from social platforms, entertainment, work, education, and commerce, that gives us the control to stop him. After 2 decades of social media and 2 decades of Zuckerberg, leaders in offices and schools and churches and government should recognize these products are hurting us more than they're helping, and technology is not always the same as progress. Ryan, the politics are in that last part. Zuckerberg is saying that he's preparing right now to build up a metaverse that infiltrates education, commerce, social media, part of our everyday lives. And that gives people in leadership positions, employers, civic leaders, that's going to be on them, whether they want to import this technology into their workplace. Lawmakers, do you want to normalize this? Do you want to incorporate it? And it seems to me Zuckerberg would rather have us talking about censorship, would rather have us talking about censorship or election interference than about some of these deeper questions. But maybe I'm off on that.
And so Zuckerberg, what's he trying to do? Like, get Oculus headsets to like teachers and administrators and other people, so they start having meetings in virtual reality? Is that his game? Is that how he's trying to basically kind of insinuate the metaverse into the real verse?
Yeah, and churches, like people normalize people going to church over that, and he wants to do it really quickly. And basically what Zoom did during the pandemic, I think, is the idea for how, there's a version of Zoom in the metaverse where you just go into a meeting room and suddenly you're all meeting there. And if you normalize that technology, everyone has the Oculus headset, everyone has subscriptions to the metaverse programs and software, and thus it has been insinuated into commerce, as he says.
Mm-hmm. So have you ever done the virtual reality, the Oculus thing, or any of the other?
Yeah, I have an Oculus. I made fun of my friend for having an Oculus and tried it on, and within 10 minutes had bought my own because the technology is so captivating. But that's also why that's particularly why I think it's very, very dangerous. You've tried one, I assume.
Yeah, I took the kids to Hershey Park this summer, and they had a thing for like $15. You could do this, and I had kind of avoided / resisted it up until then, and I was like, let me try this, and I had the same experience that you did, because I did it with one of my kids first, and then I brought the other kids. I was like, you gotta see this. It's wild. Like, yeah, you put it on and you're like in another world. Like I looked over at my daughter and she had turned into an alien. It looked like she looked like an alien, and we're shooting other aliens, and flying through tunnels. It was absolutely kind of like wild how realistic it felt, and I could instantly see the way that you could imagine the world kind of gravitating toward a world that you can produce in the way that you want it, rather than the real world, which you have to work much harder to produce in a way that delivers any semblance of joy for people. And so it does have some real kind of dystopian elements, shot through with this utopian kind of aspiration. So yeah, I don't like. Whew, well, we think this social media like fixation that we have now is bad. I can only begin to imagine what a meta world would look like for our spirits.
I'm also curious because you're in Vermont right now, and you're not from a big city, and even if you were from a big city, this is a relevant question. When you invest in your local community, you're physically invested in your local community. You spend time with people around you. The community, the more people do that, we have research that shows the better off the community is. Because other people are invested in making it better. And so anything that continues to sort of eat away at those ties, that connects us, like the new Facebook newsfeed is going to try to do, connects us to people on the other side of the world more than it connects us to the people around us, which Facebook originally tried to do. That seems to be also, and the metaverse will make that even worse, but that seems to be really scary too.
As you were just quoting a wise person saying that our relationships are a raincoat in life's storm, which has some kind of confusion. Yes, your mom had forwarded an email to that effect. Yes. Which has some real Confucian undertones, and from a Confucian perspective, you are your role in your relationships. There's a saying that's something like, if you have one human, you actually have no humans. Like there have to be at least two people for there to be one, because without each other we're nothing, and we're defined by our relationships and the roles that we play in them. And so if you strip that away, then from that perspective, you are quite literally stripping your humanity away and replacing it with this completely artificial sense of relationships. And that then you have fundamentally changed what it means to be alive.
It is thoroughly disturbing to me how absent that discussion is from our politics, especially for a company that is as politically active and a person who is as politically active as Meta and Zuckerberg are. It's just, we just gloss over all of these much deeper, more ethical questions. We're just like slouching into this dystopia, like the frog in the pot of boiling water. You don't know that you're boiling till you're scalded, and it's not anything in the political context. It's a blip on the radar.
Yeah, and to like tweak the analogy a bit, it would be like if the boiling water kind of felt nice to the frog. You put those goggles on and you're like, whoa, this is kind of cool. This is wild.
Yeah.
Right, and then the next thing you know, you're boiled to death.
Right. Well, on that grim note, I'm looking forward to what is on your radar next. It's actually not grim for once.